19 nannies had fled in terror. She had 30 seconds before security threw her out. But when this black maid whispered 4 words to the millionaire's screaming autistic son, he stopped mid-meltdown and did something that made his father realize everything he thought he knew about his children was a lie. Hit that like button right now, smash subscribe, and whatever you do, don't skip any part of this story because every single second is absolute fire. Drop a comment telling us what you think is about to happen, because this one's about to blow your mind. The crash that echoed through the Blackstone mansion at 6:47 a.m. wasn't just expensive crystal hitting marble, it was the sound of a family falling apart. Nanny number 19 stood frozen in the foyer, her crisp British accent reduced to stammering as 3-year-old Oliver Blackstone hung upside down from a crystal chandelier like a tiny finger-paint-covered monkey. Below him, his identical brother Ethan spun in circles on the slippery marble floor, arms outstretched, humming a tune that sounded like a fire truck having an existential crisis. And somewhere in the chaos, their brother Liam had constructed what appeared to be a fortress out of priceless Italian furniture. This is absolutely barbaric. Margaret Wellington Smith shrieked, her designer uniform splattered with what appeared to be organic, gluten-free oatmeal. Mr. Blackstone, these children are completely crash. The chandelier swayed ominously as Oliver swung from crystal to crystal like he was auditioning for Cirque du Soleil. That's when Nathaniel Blackstone appeared in the doorway. And even in his current state of disaster, he was the kind of man who made women forget their own names. 6'2" of rumpled masculinity, with dark hair that had gone prematurely silver at the temples and steel-gray eyes that usually commanded boardrooms but now held the hollow look of a man who'd been defeated by 3 toddlers. "Oliver, son, please come down from there," he said, his voice carrying that smooth Georgia drawl that made investors sign million-dollar contracts. But apparently, it had zero effect on autistic 3-year-olds with artistic inclinations. Oliver responded by letting go with one hand and swinging in a perfect arc, his Superman underwear the only thing between him and complete nudity. "That's it." Margaret grabbed her designer purse like a weapon. "I'm calling the agency. Don't contact us again. Ever." She fled toward the front door, but not before stepping directly into a strategically placed puddle of what appeared to be chocolate pudding. Her shriek of horror echoed through the marble halls as she stumbled, arms windmilling, before catching herself and running, actually running, toward her escape. The front door slammed so hard it rattled windows 3 floors up, and the sudden silence that followed, Nathaniel stared at his sons. Oliver had somehow made it down from the chandelier and was now painting the walls with his breakfast. Ethan continued his spinning dance, completely absorbed in his own world. And Liam. Liam was watching everything from his furniture fort with those dark, intelligent eyes that looked exactly like their mother's. Have you ever had a moment where your whole world felt completely out of control? Drop a comment and tell us about it. 19, Nathaniel whispered to himself. 19 nannies. Mrs. Chen appeared beside him, her usually immaculate appearance suggesting she'd survived her own war zone in the kitchen. At 55, she'd worked for the Blackstone family for 8 years, had seen them transition from young married couple to parents of triplets, and had somehow endured the last 8 months of single-father chaos. But even her legendary composure was showing cracks. "Sir," she said in her gentle Korean accent, "perhaps it's time to admit that what these boys need, it's not something the agencies can provide." Before Nathaniel could ask what she meant, his phone buzzed with a text that made his blood pressure spike. Henderson Group meeting. Moved to 10 a.m. Also, Sunshine Nanny Services is blacklisting your address. Sorry. Jennifer blacklisted. By a childcare agency. He ran a tech company worth 8 figures, employed over 200 people, and made decisions that affected thousands of lives daily. But 3 little boys, 3 beautiful, broken little boys had completely defeated him. 8 months. 8 months since Elena died in that car accident on I-285, and he still felt like he was drowning every single day. The boys had been challenging before, Autism came with its own set of beautiful complications, but after losing their mother, they'd retreated into their own world so completely that sometimes Nathaniel wondered if they even remembered he existed. "What do you suggest?" he asked Mrs. Chun, watching Oliver discover that finger paint worked just as well on expensive leather furniture as it did on walls. "I don't know," she admitted, "but whatever we're doing isn't working." Meanwhile, across Atlanta in the old Fourth Ward, Rebecca Washington was having her own kind of crisis, though hers involved significantly less property damage and significantly more empty refrigerators. "Mama, the rent man left another paper," 7-year-old Maya called from their tiny living room window. Rebecca set down the iron she'd been running on extension cord power since their electricity got cut off and smoothed her hands over the navy blue dress that had seen better years but still carried dignity like armor. At 28, she possessed the kind of natural beauty that poverty couldn't diminish: rich mahogany skin that seemed to glow from within, expressive dark eyes that held depths of compassion earned through struggle, and hands that spoke of hard work but gentle touch. "What color paper, baby girl?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Pink. The scary pink. Eviction notice." Rebecca's chest tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "We'll figure it out. We always do." Maya appeared in the bedroom doorway, all 7 years of gap-toothed grins and wisdom that came from growing up too fast. She'd inherited her mother's luminous eyes and her late grandmother's gift for finding hope in impossible situations, but she'd also developed an awareness of their precarious circumstances that no child should have to carry. "Mama, why do you keep getting dressed up pretty when we don't have nowhere to go?" Rebecca fastened her grandmother's cross pendant at her throat, the only valuable thing she owned, and the one thing she'd never sell. "Because your grandmama always said you never know when opportunity might come knocking. And when it does, you want to be ready to answer the door dressed like you deserve whatever blessings coming your way." As if summoned by those words, someone knocked on their apartment door. 3 firm raps that sounded like either very good news or very bad news. Rebecca opened the door to find Mrs. Patterson from the community center, slightly out of breath from the 3-flight climb and holding a folded piece of paper like it contained either salvation or damnation. "Rebecca, honey," Mrs. Patterson panted, "I know you've been looking for work. There's a position. It's a long shot, but—" She held out the paper. "The money is real good. Real good." Rebecca's hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the paper. When she saw the salary listed, her knees actually wobbled. "This can't be right." "It is. But Rebecca, you should know, they've gone through a lot of help. A lot. And the children have special needs. They're autistic." Maya peeked around her mother's legs with a fearless curiosity that only 7-year-olds possessed. "What's autistic mean?" Mrs. Patterson crouched down to Maya's level. "It means their brains work a little differently, sweetheart. They see the world in their own special way, and sometimes that makes things harder for the grown-ups who don't understand." Maya nodded solemnly. "Like my friend Marcus at school. He doesn't like loud noises, but he knows everything about trains and can remember every birthday in our whole class." "Exactly like that." Rebecca stared at the Buckhead address, a world so far from hers it might as well have been on another planet. She had no formal training, no fancy degrees, no experience with autism beyond what Maya had taught her about her classmate. What she had was 8 years of single motherhood, a heart full of love, and bills that weren't going to pay themselves with good intentions. "When do they want to meet?" she asked. "This afternoon. If you can make it." 2 hours later, Rebecca stood outside the gates of what looked like a palace dropped into the middle of Atlanta. The Blackstone estate sprawled across manicured lawns like something from a movie, all modern glass and Georgia stone and money. Lots and lots of money. She pressed the intercom button, her stomach doing acrobatics. "Hello." The voice sounded desperate, frazzled. "This is Rebecca Washington. I'm here about the childcare position." A pause that lasted just long enough for Rebecca to wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake. Then, "Oh, thank God. Please, come in. Quickly. Before someone else quits." The gate swung open, and Rebecca walked up the circular driveway toward what appeared to be barely controlled chaos visible through massive windows. She could see movement inside, fast, frantic movement that looked like a nature documentary about hurricanes. The front door opened before she could knock, revealing a harried Asian woman who looked like she'd survived a natural disaster. "Mrs. Chun," the woman said, extending a hand with obvious relief. "I'm the housekeeper. And you must be either very brave, very desperate, or completely unaware of what you're walking into." From somewhere deep in the house came the sound of something expensive meeting its end, followed by a man's voice trying to project authority and failing spectacularly. "That would be Mr. Blackstone attempting to manage snack time," Mrs. Chun explained with a weary tone of someone who'd seen this movie before. "Should we?" Rebecca gestured toward the sounds of domestic warfare. Mrs. Chun studied her face with the intensity of someone evaluating whether this stranger might actually survive what lay beyond those doors. "Are you absolutely sure you want to see this? Because once you walk into that room, there's no pretending this family is anything close to normal." Rebecca thought about Maya's words about opportunity knocking, about the pink eviction notice on their kitchen table, about her grandmother's voice whispering that love could fix things that looked unfixable. "Mrs. Chun," she said softly, "I don't think normal families are the ones who need help." And with that, she stepped through the doorway into beautiful, expensive chaos, and into a life she never could have imagined. The sound that greeted her was like nothing she'd ever heard. Not quite crying, not quite screaming, but something deeper, the sound of 3 little hearts who had run out of ways to say "help me," and had resorted to pure, raw expression of their pain. What Rebecca Washington did next would change everything. But first, she had to see them. The living room looked like a war zone designed by millionaires. Rebecca stepped through the doorway and felt her breath catch, not because of the overturned Italian leather furniture or the finger paint decorating custom wallpaper that probably cost more than her annual rent. What stopped her cold was the raw pain echoing from 3 tiny voices who had clearly reached their breaking point, and the center of the chaos stood Nathaniel Blackstone. And even in his current state of domestic defeat, he was breathtaking. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair mussed beyond repair and steel-gray eyes that held the kind of exhaustion that came from months of fighting a war he couldn't win. His expensive shirt was splattered with what appeared to be yogurt and finger paint, his designer tie hung askew, and he was trying to corner a half-naked 3-year-old while maintaining some semblance of parental authority. "Oliver, please," Nathaniel's voice cracked with desperation. "We've talked about this. Clothes stay on our bodies, remember? Clothes stay on, Oliver, distinguishable by." A small scar above his left eyebrow and currently wearing nothing but Superman underwear and a layer of vanilla pudding, launched himself onto the marble coffee table and began what could only be described as a victory dance. In the corner, Ethan sat rocking back and forth, his cowlick sticking up at impossible angles as he hummed a tune that vibrated through the air like a tuning fork. His hands flapped rhythmically, and his eyes were closed tight against the overwhelming sensory chaos around him. And Liam, quiet, observant Liam, had built himself a fortress out of couch cushions and was peering out at the world with dark eyes that held far too much understanding for a 3-year-old. Rebecca had seen enough. She did something that made Mrs. Chin gasp, that stopped Nathaniel mid-sentence, that caused all 3 boys to pause in their various states of meltdown. She sat down. Right there on the cold marble floor in her best navy dress, the one she'd ironed with battery power and hoped would make her look professional. She folded herself into a cross-legged position and began to hum. Not loudly. Not demandingly. Just soft and low, the melody her mother used to sing when Rebecca was small and the world felt too big and scary to handle alone. The change was immediate and magical. Ethan's rocking slowed. his internal rhythm adjusting to match hers. Oliver's victory dance became less frantic, more fluid. Liam's grip on his wooden comfort block relaxed slightly. Nathaniel stood frozen, staring at this woman who had just thrown every rule of professional childcare out the window. "Hey there, Superman," Rebecca said softly, her eyes finding Oliver's. She didn't try to coax him down or correct his behavior. Instead, she smiled, not the bright, overwhelming smile adults usually forced on children, but something smaller, more real. "That's some impressive dancing you've got going there. I bet you're feeling some pretty big feelings right now, huh?" Oliver stopped mid-dance, his head tilting with that calculating expression that meant his brilliant little brain was processing something entirely new. "You know," Rebecca continued, her voice carrying the gentle warmth of someone who understood, "I have a little girl at home who loves to dance too. Sometimes when Maya's heart feels too full, she dances all those feelings out. Is that what you're doing up there? Dancing out some feelings that are too big for words?" For the first time in 8 months, Oliver made direct eye contact with a stranger. Brief but unmistakably there. Rebecca turned toward Ethan, following his melodic humming. "That's a beautiful song, sweetheart. I can feel it in my chest, the way it hums. Can you teach me how it goes?" Ethan's eyes opened, just a crack, and for a heartbeat, he looked directly at her. Then his humming grew stronger, more confident, as if he'd been waiting months for someone to really listen to his music. The sound of Nathaniel's sharp intake of breath was audible across the room. These were his boys, his beautiful, unreachable boys, and this stranger was connecting with them in ways 19 trained professionals hadn't even attempted. "And Liam," Rebecca called gently toward the cushion fort, "that looks like a really safe hiding spot you've built. Sometimes the world feels too loud and too much, doesn't it? Would it be okay if I sat here with you for a while? I promise I won't make it louder." A small hand emerged from the fort, not pointing or grabbing, just reaching, as if testing whether this new person was safe. "I see you, baby," Rebecca whispered, and something in those 4 words made Liam's entire body relax. "I see you, and you're exactly right just as you are." Nathaniel felt something crack open in his chest. He'd watched 19 trained professionals try to manage his boys like they were problems to be solved, behaviors to be corrected. This woman was treating them like people. Like small humans with big feelings and good reasons for everything they did. "Mr. Blackstone," Rebecca said, looking up at him with eyes that held no judgment, only understanding. "Would you mind sitting down here with us? Sometimes when everyone's on the same level, it's easier to hear each other." The suggestion was so radical it took his breath away. Nathaniel Blackstone didn't sit on floors. He commanded boardrooms, stood at podiums, towered over conference tables making million-dollar decisions. But something in this woman's voice, something that spoke of acceptance rather than expectation, made him slowly, carefully, lower himself to the marble floor. The moment his expensive suit hit the ground, magic happened. Oliver climbed down from the coffee table and, still wearing nothing but his Superman underwear, walked directly to his father and climbed into his lap. Not because he was being directed to, but because suddenly it felt safe to do so. Ethan's humming grew stronger, more melodic, and he began to rock in rhythm with Rebecca's gentle tune. And Liam, precious, careful Liam, emerged completely from his fort and took 3 tentative steps toward the growing circle on the floor. "There we go," Rebecca said, her voice warm with approval. "Now we're all speaking the same language." "What language is that?" Nathaniel asked, his voice rough with emotions he couldn't name. "Heart language," she said simply. "It's the only language that really matters when someone's hurting." Ethan stood up suddenly and walked directly to Rebecca. For a moment she thought he might speak, his mouth open slightly, but instead he reached out with gentle fingers and touched her cross pendant. "Pretty," he whispered. The first word any stranger had heard from him since his mother died. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "Thank you, baby. My mama gave this to me before she went to heaven. She said it would help me remember that love is always, always stronger than hurt." "Love," Ethan repeated, his fingers still tracing the small cross with wonder. And then Liam did something that made everyone in the room hold their breath. He walked over to Rebecca, looked directly into her eyes, and handed her his wooden block, the comfort object he'd never, ever shared with anyone. Rebecca accepted it with the reverence of someone receiving a sacred trust. "This is beautiful, Liam. It's so smooth and warm. I bet you've held it so much that it knows exactly how your hands feel, doesn't it?" Liam's response was barely a whisper, but it rang through the silent room like a bell. "Safe." "Yes," Rebecca said, understanding flooding her voice. "Safe. That's exactly what this is." She looked up at Nathaniel, who was staring at his sons, Oliver relaxed in his lap, Ethan sitting beside her touching her necklace with wonder, Liam secure in her arms with his precious block, with an expression of pure amazement. "How did you?" he started, then stopped. "They've never, not with anyone." "Mr. Blackstone," Rebecca said softly, "sometimes children don't need us to fix them or change them or make them behave differently. Sometimes they just need us to love them exactly where they are, exactly as they are, and trust that they're doing the best they can with hearts that have been through too much." The afternoon sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows caught the single tear that escaped down Nathaniel's cheek. For the first time since Elena died, he looked at his boys and didn't see chaos or problems to be managed. He saw his children. Just his beautiful, brilliant children who had been trying to tell him something all along. "We're hurting, and we need you to hurt with us before we can heal. When was the last time someone truly saw you for who you really are? Share that moment with us. We'd love to hear your story." Mrs. Chun, who had been watching from the doorway with tears streaming down her face, quietly pulled out her phone and sent a text to the employment agency. "Cancel all other interviews. We found her. We found exactly who this family needs," and that sun-drenched living room, surrounded by the beautiful wreckage of a morning's chaos. For broken hearts began the slow, careful work of learning to beat in harmony again. And Rebecca Washington, who had walked into this mansion, expecting nothing more than a paycheck, began to understand that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply love someone exactly as they are, broken pieces and all. But as the golden afternoon light faded and reality began to creep back in, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that this moment of perfect connection was too good to be true. And she was right to worry. Because sometimes, when something feels too good to be true, it's because the real test hasn't started yet. 3 days later, Rebecca stood in the Blackstone kitchen at 6:30 a.m., watching Oliver methodically arrange his Cheerios into perfect rows while humming the same tune Ethan had taught her that first magical afternoon. The morning light streaming through the windows caught the golden highlights in his dark hair, so much like his father's, and for a moment, everything felt beautifully normal. Then she heard Nathaniel's voice from the hallway, sharp and professional in a way that made her stomach clench. "Jennifer, I need the Morrison contracts on my desk by 9. And cancel my lunch with Davidson. Something's come up with the boys." Rebecca's hands stilled on the coffee pot. Something's come up with the boys. As if they were a problem to be managed, rather than children who'd just learned to trust again. "Rebecca." Oliver's small voice drew her attention back to the breakfast table. He was pointing at his cereal arrangement, his eyes bright with pride. "Look. Train." She did look, and sure enough, his Cheerios formed a perfect locomotive pattern. Her heart swelled. "That's amazing, Oliver. You made a whole train just with your breakfast. Your brain sees things in such special ways." "Special," he repeated, the word rolling around his mouth like he was tasting it. "Very special," she confirmed, ruffling his hair gently, a gesture that 3 days ago would have sent him into a meltdown, but now made him giggle. Nathaniel appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed in another $1,000 suit, his phone pressed to his ear. When he saw Oliver laughing, actually laughing, with Rebecca, something flickered across his face. Relief? Gratitude? Or something else entirely? "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, ending the call abruptly. The silence that followed felt loaded with unspoken questions. "Good morning, Mr. Blackstone," Rebecca said, her voice carefully professional. Over the past 3 days, she'd learned to read his moods in the set of his shoulders, the line of his jaw. This morning, tension radiated from him like heat from pavement. "Good morning." His voice was distant, formal, nothing like the soft, vulnerable tone he'd used when they'd all sat on the floor together. How are they this morning?" The question felt like a test, though Rebecca couldn't figure out what the right answer was supposed to be. "They're wonderful," she said honestly. "Oliver's been building things with his breakfast. Ethan taught me a new song while we got dressed. And Liam." She smiled, remembering. "Liam showed me his favorite book. He can't read the words yet, but he knows every picture by heart." Nathaniel nodded, but his expression remained carefully neutral. "That's good. Very good." 3 days later, Rebecca stood in the Blackstone kitchen at 6:30 a.m., watching Oliver methodically arrange his Cheerios into perfect rows while humming the same tune Ethan had taught her that first magical afternoon. The morning light streaming through the windows caught the golden highlights in his dark hair, so much like his father's, and for a moment, everything felt beautifully normal. Then she heard Nathaniel's voice from the hallway, sharp and professional in a way that made her stomach clench. "Jennifer, I need the Morrison contracts on my desk by 9. And cancel my lunch with Davidson. Something's come up with the boys." Rebecca's hands stilled on the coffee pot. Something's come up with the boys. As if they were a problem to be managed, rather than children who'd just learned to trust again. "Rebecca." Oliver's small voice drew her attention back to the breakfast table. He was pointing at his cereal arrangement, his eyes bright with pride. "Look. Train." She did look, and sure enough, his Cheerios formed a perfect locomotive pattern. Her heart swelled. "That's amazing, Oliver. You made a whole train just with your breakfast. Your brain sees things in such special ways." "Special," he repeated, the word rolling around his mouth like he was tasting it. "Very special," she confirmed, ruffling his hair gently, a gesture that 3 days ago would have sent him into a meltdown, but now made him giggle. Nathaniel appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed in another $1,000 suit, his phone pressed to his ear. When he saw Oliver laughing, actually laughing, with Rebecca, something flickered across his face. Relief? Gratitude? Or something else entirely? "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, ending the call abruptly. The silence that followed felt loaded with unspoken questions. "Good morning, Mr. Blackstone," Rebecca said, her voice carefully professional. Over the past 3 days, she'd learned to read his moods in the set of his shoulders, the line of his jaw. This morning, tension radiated from him like heat from pavement. "Good morning." His voice was distant, formal, nothing like the soft, vulnerable tone he'd used when they'd all sat on the floor together. How are they this morning?" The question felt like a test, though Rebecca couldn't figure out what the right answer was supposed to be. "They're wonderful," she said honestly. "Oliver's been building things with his breakfast. Ethan taught me a new song while we got dressed. And Liam." She smiled, remembering. "Liam showed me his favorite book. He can't read the words yet, but he knows every picture by heart." Nathaniel nodded, but his expression remained carefully neutral. "That's good. Very good." But something in his tone suggested he thought it was anything but good. Ethan and Liam appeared in the kitchen doorway, both already dressed, a minor miracle that Rebecca had accomplished through patience, songs, and a kind of gentle routine that felt more like a dance than a chore. Becca. Ethan called out, using the nickname he'd invented for her. He ran to her side and wrapped his arms around her legs in a hug that made her heart skip. Liam followed more slowly, but when he reached Rebecca, he held up his wooden block, his precious comfort object, and placed it gently in her palm. It had become their morning ritual, this sharing of his most treasured possession. "Thank you for keeping it safe, Liam," she said softly, handing it back to him. "It's lucky to have someone who loves it so much." Nathaniel watched this exchange with an expression Rebecca couldn't quite read. When Liam turned to him with a tentative smile, offering his father the same gentle connection he just shared with Rebecca, Nathaniel's response was stilted. "Good morning, son," he said, his voice carrying that same formal distance. "Are you ready for your therapy session with Dr. Martinez today?" Liam's smile faded instantly. His little shoulders hunched, and he clutched his wooden block tighter. "Actually," Rebecca said carefully, "I was wondering if we might talk about that. The boys have been doing so well with their routines here, and I thought maybe Dr. Martinez has been working with the boys since." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Since their mother died. She's a trained professional with years of experience in autism spectrum disorders. I think it's best if we stick to established protocols." The words hit Rebecca like a slap. Trained professional. Established protocols. The message was clear: you're not qualified to make these decisions. "Of course," she said quietly, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I just thought," Rebecca, Nathaniel interrupted, and something in his tone made all three boys look up with worried eyes. "I appreciate what you've done here. I do. But let's not forget that this is a temporary arrangement until we can find a more suitable long-term solution." Temporary. Suitable. Long-term solution. Rebecca felt the words settle in her chest like stones. She'd been fooling herself, thinking that connection meant something more than convenience. Thinking that love might actually be enough. "I understand," she said, though her voice came out smaller than she intended. The boys sensed the shift in energy immediately. Oliver's carefully arranged Cheerios suddenly lost their appeal. Ethan's humming stopped mid-tune. Liam took a step closer to Rebecca, his protective instincts kicking in. Even at 3 years old, Nathaniel's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it with obvious relief. "I have to take this. Rebecca, please have them ready for Dr. Martinez at 10. He was gone before she could respond, his voice already shifting back to business mode as he answered his call. Rebecca stood in the suddenly quiet kitchen, 3 little boys looking up at her with eyes that had learned too young to recognize when the grown-ups were pulling away. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring them or herself. "Everything's okay." But Ethan, with his uncanny ability to read emotions, walked over and patted her arm with the same gentleness she'd shown him. "Sad," he said simply. "A little sad," she admitted, because lying to children always made things worse. But sad doesn't last forever. Happy comes back. She hoped that was true. Later that morning, Rebecca sat in the waiting room outside Dr. Martinez's office, listening to the muffled sounds of the therapy session through the door. Official voices. Clinical terms. The boys' occasional protests or cries when they were pushed beyond their comfort zones. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "How's work, Mama? Do they like you?" Rebecca stared at the screen, her throat tight. How could she explain that she'd fallen in love with 3 little boys and their broken father, only to discover that love wasn't enough to bridge the gap between their worlds? Another text from Maya. "Mrs. Johnson says you missed the rent meeting. Are we in trouble?" Rebecca's stomach dropped. In the 3 days she'd been lost in the bubble of the Blackstone family, she'd forgotten about the real world waiting for her outside these mansion walls. The eviction notice. The unpaid bills. The fragile life she'd built for Maya that was always one missed payment away from falling apart. Everything's fine, baby girl, she texted back. Mama's got it handled. Another lie wrapped in hope. When the therapy session ended, the boys emerged looking drained and overstimulated. Oliver's shirt was damp with tears. Ethan's hands were flapping rapidly, his self-soothing mechanism when the world became too much. Liam clutched his wooden block so tightly his knuckles were white. Dr. Martinez, a well-meaning woman in her 50s with kind eyes and clinical vocabulary, pulled Rebecca aside. I understand you've been making some unconventional choices with the boys, she said, her tone carefully neutral. While I appreciate that they seem comfortable with you, it's important that we maintain consistency with their behavioral interventions. Structure is crucial for children on the spectrum. Of course, Rebecca said, though every instinct in her body screamed that these children needed love more than structure, connection more than intervention. Mr. Blackstone has expressed some concerns about maintaining professional boundaries, Dr. Martinez continued. These children have experienced significant trauma, and it's important that they don't become too attached to temporary caregivers. There it was again. Temporary. Professional boundaries. Too attached, yes, if love was something dangerous instead of healing. That afternoon, Rebecca found herself sitting in the garden with the boys, watching them play in the sandbox Nathaniel had built for them months ago, back when he still believed in simple solutions to complex problems. Oliver was building elaborate sandcastles with mathematical precision. Ethan was burying his feet and giggling at the sensation. Liam sat quietly beside Rebecca, occasionally offering her his wooden block in a gesture of comfort that broke her heart a little more each time. Becca. Ethan's voice was soft, uncertain. You stay. The question every child asks when their world feels unstable. The question Rebecca had no honest way to answer. I'm here right now, she said carefully. Right now, in this moment, I'm here with you. It wasn't enough, and they all knew it. That evening, as Rebecca helped the boys through their bedtime routine, a process that had transformed from battlefield to ballet in just 3 days, she found herself memorizing details. The way Oliver liked his stuffed elephant position just so. The specific song Ethan needed to hear before he could settle down. The way Liam's breathing changed when he finally felt safe enough to sleep. She was still tucking Liam in when Nathaniel appeared in the doorway. Rebecca? Could I speak with you downstairs? Her stomach dropped, but she kissed Liam's forehead and whispered, Sweet dreams, baby boy. In the living room where they'd first connected, Nathaniel stood by the windows with his back to her. Even in silhouette, she could see the tension in his shoulders. The boys seem settled, he said without turning around. They're remarkable children, she replied. They just needed someone to understand their language. Yes. Well. He finally turned to face her, and she was struck by how tired he looked. That's what I wanted to discuss. This arrangement, it's become complicated. Rebecca's heart started beating faster. Complicated how? The boys are getting attached. To you. And while I appreciate everything you've done, I have to think about what's best for them long term. And what's best for them is stability, professional care, someone with the proper credentials and training. The words hit her like physical blows. I see. I don't think you do. Nathaniel ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she'd learned meant he was struggling with something. Rebecca, you're good with them. Better than anyone we've had. But they're already asking when you're coming back when you leave each evening. What happens when this doesn't work out? What happens when you find something better and leave them again? The accusation stung because it was wrapped in truth. She was temporary. She was unqualified. She was exactly the kind of person who left when things got complicated, wasn't she? "Mr. Blackstone," she said quietly, "have I given you any reason to think I would abandon them?" "You don't understand," he said, and for the first time, his carefully controlled facade cracked. "These boys have lost enough. Their mother was everything to them. To me. And when she died, they lost their whole world. I can't let them go through that again." And there it was. The real truth underneath all the talk of credentials and professionalism. Nathaniel wasn't protecting his boys from getting too attached to Rebecca, he was protecting himself. Have you ever been so afraid of losing someone that you pushed them away first? Tell us about it in the comments. Rebecca stood in that expensive living room, surrounded by the toys and laughter that had filled it over the past 3 days, and felt the walls of her own heart starting to rebuild themselves. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was fooling herself, thinking she belonged in this world of marble floors and endless possibilities. Maybe temporary was all she'd ever been meant to be. Rebecca was halfway home, her heart still aching from Nathaniel's words, when her phone exploded with notifications. The first call came from Mrs. Chun, her voice high with panic. "Rebecca, you need to come back. Now. Something's wrong with Liam." The second call, 30 seconds later, was Nathaniel himself. "Rebecca, please. I don't know what to do. He won't stop, he's hurting himself." Rebecca was already turning her beat-up Honda around before the third call came through, this one from a number she didn't recognize. "Ms. Washington? This is Dr. Martinez. We have a situation with the Blackstone boys. Liam has gone into what appears to be a severe regression episode, and he's asking for you. Only you." The 23-minute drive back to Buckhead felt like 23 hours. Rebecca's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles went white as she prayed to every saint her grandmother had ever mentioned. "Please," she whispered into the evening air. "Please let him be okay." She'd seen this before, not with autistic children, but with Maya after her father left. The way trauma could hit like a delayed earthquake, shaking everything loose just when you thought the ground was finally stable. The gates to the estate swung open before she even pressed the intercom. Mrs. Chun must have been watching for her. Rebecca abandoned her car in the circular driveway and ran toward the front door, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sound hit her before she even entered the house. T wasn't crying. It wasn't screaming. It was something deeper, more primal, the sound of a little soul in absolute anguish, beyond words, beyond comfort, beyond anything except pure raw pain. Nathaniel met her at the door, and the sight of him stopped her cold. His perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive shirt wrinkled and damp with sweat. But it was his eyes that broke her heart, wild with panic and something that looked terrifyingly close to despair. "Thank God you're here," he said, his voice cracking. "He's been like this for 2 hours. Ever since you left. He won't let anyone touch him, won't take his comfort block, won't even look at us." Dr. Martinez tried everything. Rebecca was already moving past him, following the heartbreaking sounds to the living room where they'd first connected 3 days ago. The scene that greeted her was devastating. Liam sat in the corner where his cushion fort used to be, but now the cushions were scattered across the room like fabric casualties. He was rocking back and forth with a violence that suggested self-harm, his small fists clenched so tightly they were white. His wooden block lay forgotten several feet away. The fact that he'd abandoned his most precious comfort object told Rebecca everything she needed to know about how deeply he was hurting. Oliver and Ethan huddled together on the far side of the room, their eyes wide with the kind of terror that comes from watching your brother fall apart and not understanding why. Oliver's carefully arranged patterns were scattered, forgotten. Ethan had gone completely silent, his usual humming replaced by an eerie stillness that was somehow worse than screaming. Doctor Martinez stood helplessly nearby, her clinical training apparently useless against the raw power of a 3-year-old's broken heart. "Liam, sweetie, it's Dr. Martinez," she was saying in her professional voice. Can you tell me what you're feeling? Can you use your words? But Liam was beyond words. Beyond reach. Lost in a place where logic and therapy techniques couldn't follow. That's when Rebecca did something that made Dr. Martinez gasp in horror. She got down on the floor, not near Liam, but across the room, and began to rock. The same rhythm as his rocking, the same desperate cadence, but slower, gentler. I see you, baby boy, she said softly, not trying to touch him or calm him, just being present in his pain. I see how much it hurts. I see how scared you are. Liam's rocking slowed slightly, his tear-streaked face turning toward her voice. Rebecca, Dr. Martinez said sharply, you shouldn't encourage the repetitive behavior. Respectfully, Dr. Martinez, Rebecca said without taking her eyes off Liam, he's not giving me repetitive behavior. He's showing me his heart. And his heart is breaking. She kept rocking, kept speaking in that soft, steady voice. You thought I was gone forever, didn't you, baby? You thought I left you like other people have left. Liam's fists unclenched slightly. I know that feeling, Rebecca continued, her voice thick with her own memories. When I was little, my daddy left one day and never came back. And I thought it was because I wasn't good enough, wasn't worth staying for. Is that what you're feeling? Like maybe you weren't good enough to make me stay. The silence in the room was deafening. Even Dr. Martinez had stopped her professional interventions. But baby boy, Rebecca whispered, I didn't leave because of you. I left because the grown-ups got scared. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes when they're scared, and we hurt the people we love most. Liam's rocking had slowed to almost normal now, his dark eyes fixed on her face with desperate intensity. Can I tell you a secret? Rebecca asked. The whole drive here, I was praying. Praying to see your sweet face again, praying to hear Ethan's beautiful songs, praying to watch Oliver build his amazing patterns. Because you three? You're not just my job. You're pieces of my heart walking around outside my body. Something shifted in Liam's expression. The wild panic was fading, replaced by tentative hope. Becca. His voice was so small, so broken, it made every adult in the room want to weep. I'm here, baby. I'm right here. You came back. I came back. Liam stood up on shaky legs and took one step toward her. Then another. Then he was running, launching himself into her arms with the kind of desperate trust that only children possess. Rebecca caught him, folding him against her chest as he sobbed. Real tears now, not the dry, panicked keening from before. Her own tears fell silently into his dark hair as she rocked him, whispering every comfort her grandmother had ever given her. I'm sorry, baby boy. I'm so sorry. The grown-ups made mistakes, but that doesn't mean you're not loved. That doesn't mean you're not worth staying for. Oliver and Ethan, seeing their brother safe, slowly approached the circle of comfort. Oliver climbed into Rebecca's lap alongside Liam. Ethan settled beside them, his hand finding Rebecca's arm and gripping tight. Group hug, Ethan whispered, the longest sentence he'd spoken since his mother died, Dr. Martinez watched this reunion with obvious confusion. I don't understand, she said to Nathaniel, who stood frozen in the doorway. According to attachment theory, this level of distress upon separation indicates an unhealthy dependency. No, Nathaniel said quietly, his voice rough with emotions he could no longer deny. It indicates love. He walked slowly into the room and knelt beside the cluster of his sons and the woman who had somehow become essential to their healing. It indicates that someone finally loved them enough to come back. Rebecca looked up at him over the heads of his children, all three boys now calm, safe, whole in ways they hadn't been in months, and saw something in his steel-gray eyes that took her breath away. Fear. Yes. But also recognition. The dawning understanding that what had happened in this room wasn't about professional boundaries or temporary arrangements or proper credentials. It was about family. The kind of family that chooses each other, fights for each other, comes back for each other no matter what the cost. "Mr. Blackstone," Rebecca said softly, "we need to talk." "Yes," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We do. But first," they had 3 little boys to tuck into bed. 3 little boys who needed to know that the grown-ups had figured out how to stop being scared long enough to choose love. Have you ever had a moment where you realized that love wasn't a weakness but the strongest thing you possess? Share your story with us as Rebecca carried exhausted Liam upstairs, Oliver's hand in hers and Ethan humming softly beside them. She felt something settle in her chest that hadn't been there an hour ago. Certainty. She wasn't temporary. She wasn't unqualified. She wasn't the kind of person who left when things got complicated. She was exactly what this family needed. And maybe, just maybe, they were exactly what she needed too. But convincing Nathaniel of that? That was going to be the hardest conversation of her life. Later that night, after the boys had finally fallen asleep, all 3 of them insisting on sleeping in Oliver's room, their small bodies creating a protective circle on the king-sized bed, Rebecca found herself in the kitchen with Nathaniel, the silence between them heavy with everything they hadn't said, sat at the marble island, still wearing his wrinkled dress shirt, his head in his hands. The confident CEO facade had completely crumbled, leaving behind something raw and vulnerable that made Rebecca's chest ache. "I almost lost him tonight," he said without looking up. "My son had a complete breakdown, and I stood there like a useless statue while you saved him." "You didn't lose him," Rebecca said softly, pouring 2 cups of coffee with hands that still trembled slightly from the adrenaline. "He's safe. They're all safe." "Are they?" Nathaniel finally looked up, and the anguish in his eyes was so profound it took her breath away. "Because I'm starting to think I have no idea what I'm doing. I run a company worth hundreds of millions. I make decisions that affect thousands of people, but I can't help my own children." Rebecca slid a coffee cup across the marble surface, noting how his hands shook as he lifted it. "You want to know what I saw tonight?" "What?" "I saw a father who dropped everything the moment his child needed him. I saw a man who called me back even though he'd just told me to leave. I saw someone who loves his boys so much it terrifies him." Nathaniel's laugh was bitter. "Terrifies me. That's exactly right." He took a sip of coffee, then set the cup down like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Do you want to know why I really tried to push you away today?" Rebecca waited, sensing this was the moment everything would either break or begin to heal. "Because Liam looked at you the same way he used to look at Elena." The name hung in the air between them like a bridge neither of them was sure they should cross. Elena was. Nathaniel's voice cracked. Elena was magic with them. From the moment they were born, 3 premature babies, all of them struggling, all of them so small and fragile, she just knew. She knew Oliver needed perfect order, knew Ethan needed music and movement, knew Liam needed quiet safety. She spoke their language before I even knew they had a language. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes, but she stayed silent, sensing he needed to tell this story. The doctors said having triplets with autism would be challenging. They recommended institutions, specialized schools, anything but trying to raise them at home. But Elena. He smiled through his pain. Elena told them they could take their recommendations and shove them where the sun doesn't shine. Said our boys weren't problems to be managed. They were gifts to be treasured. She sounds incredible. She was. She was everything I wasn't: patient, intuitive, gentle. I was the one who solved problems with money and connections. She was the one who solved problems with love and understanding. His hands clenched around the coffee cup. When she died, I thought maybe I could learn. Maybe I could become what they needed. But every nanny I hired, every specialist I consulted, they all saw the boys as broken things that needed fixing. And then I came along, Rebecca said quietly. And then you came along, and in 3 days you did what I couldn't do in 8 months. You saw them. Really saw them, the way Elena did. He looked at her with eyes that held too much pain. And tonight, when Liam fell apart because he thought you were leaving, it was like watching him lose his mother all over again. Rebecca felt something crack open in her chest. Nathaniel, that's why I had to push you away, he continued, as if he hadn't heard her. Because I can't watch them go through that kind of loss again. I can't watch them love someone who might leave. The kitchen fell silent except for the soft hum of expensive appliances and the sound of 2 hearts beating too fast. Can I tell you something? Rebecca said finally. About why I really needed this job. Nathaniel nodded, sensing they'd reached some kind of tipping point. Maya's father left when she was 3, Rebecca began, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. Just disappeared one day. No explanation, no goodbye, no looking back. Maya spent months asking when Daddy was coming home, and I had to watch my baby girl's heart break a little more each day when I couldn't give her an answer. She stood up, needing to move, and found herself at the window overlooking the garden where the boys played each afternoon. After he left, I promised myself I would never let Maya feel abandoned again. I would be everything she needed: mother, father, protector, provider. I worked 3 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, did whatever it took to make sure she never felt the kind of rejection that makes you question your own worth. But you're here, Nathaniel said quietly. You left her to take care of my boys. Rebecca turned to face him, and the rawness in her expression made him understand that he'd just touched the deepest wound she carried. I left her because if I didn't get this job, we were going to be evicted. Because sometimes love isn't enough to keep the lights on or food on the table. Because sometimes being a good mother means making impossible choices and hoping your child will understand when they're older. The confession hung between them like a bridge made of shared pain. Every morning when I come here, Rebecca continued, I see the way your boys light up, and it heals something in me that I didn't even know was broken. But every evening when I go home, I see the way Maya tries to pretend she's not worried about our future, and it breaks my heart all over again. Why are you telling me this? Nathaniel asked, though something in his voice suggested he already knew. Because tonight, when Liam thought I had abandoned him, I realized something. The thing we're both most afraid of, the leaving, the loss, the breaking of hearts, it's going to happen anyway if we let fear make our choices for us. She moved closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes, close enough to smell his cologne mixed with the lingering scent of his son's tears. Those boys upstairs? They're not just grieving their mother. They're grieving the father they lost too, the one who's so afraid of failing them that he's forgotten how to just love them. Nathaniel flinched as if she'd slapped him. That's not. When's the last time you got on the floor and played with them? When's the last time you sang Ethan to sleep, or helped Oliver build something, or just held Liam without worrying about whether you were doing it right? The silence that followed was devastating in its honesty. I don't know, he whispered finally. I don't know how to be what Elena was. You don't have to be Elena, Rebecca said softly. You have to be their father. They're imperfect, learning as you go, loves them desperately father. She reached across the space between them and placed her hand over his, feeling the warmth of his skin and the slight tremor that suggested he was holding himself together by threads. And I don't have to be their mother, she continued. I just have to be someone who loves them enough to stay. Someone who sees their beautiful, complicated, perfectly imperfect hearts and thinks, this is exactly where I belong. Nathaniel stared down at their joined hands, her dark skin against his pale, her calluses against his softness, her warmth melting something in him that had been frozen since the day Elena died. "What are you saying?" he asked, though his voice suggested he was afraid to hope. "I'm saying that tonight, when Liam broke down, he wasn't just afraid I was leaving. He was afraid we were leaving. All of us. The grown-ups who are supposed to keep him safe." She squeezed his hand gently. "And maybe it's time we stopped being afraid of loving each other and started being afraid of what happens if we don't." The admission hung in the air between them like a dare, like a prayer, like the most dangerous and necessary truth either of them had ever spoken. Nathaniel looked at this woman, this beautiful, brave, broken and healing woman who had walked into his life and turned everything upside down in the best possible way, and felt something shift inside his chest. "Rebecca," he said, his voice rough with emotions he'd been denying for days. "What if I told you that when you left this afternoon, it wasn't just the boys who felt abandoned?" Her breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere between watching you love my sons and seeing you fight for their hearts, I started falling for you. And it terrifies me because I never thought I'd feel this way about anyone again." The confession hit the air between them like lightning, illuminating everything they'd been dancing around for days. "Nathaniel," she whispered, his name on her lips like a promise. "I know it's complicated," he said quickly, as if she might run if he didn't get all the words out fast enough. "I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is impossible. Our different worlds, the boys, what people will think." She silenced him by moving closer, close enough that he could count the flecks of gold in her dark eyes, close enough to see the tears she'd been holding back all evening. "What if I told you," she said softly, "that falling for you feels like the first thing that's made sense since I walked through your door? What if I told you that loving your boys feels like loving pieces of my own heart? Have you ever felt like your heart was going to explode from holding in too much love? Tell us about that moment in the comments." The space between them disappeared as Nathaniel reached up to cup her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize had fallen. "What if I told you," he whispered, "that I think Elena would have loved you? That I think she would have wanted this for us, for the boys?" And there it was, permission to love, permission to heal, permission to build something beautiful from the ashes of their shared grief. But just as their lips were about to meet, just as 8 months of loneliness and fear were about to give way to hope and connection, the sound of small feet on marble stairs broke the spell. "Becca!" Liam's small voice called from the kitchen doorway, his wooden block clutched tight against his chest. "Bad dream." They sprang apart like teenagers caught by parents, but not before Liam's knowing eyes caught the charged air between them. "I'll take him back up," Rebecca said quickly, her cheeks flushed. "We both will," Nathaniel said firmly. "Together." And as they walked upstairs side by side, Liam's small hand in each of theirs, Rebecca felt something settle in her chest that had nothing to do with jobs or paychecks or temporary arrangements. He felt like coming home. But morning would bring new challenges, new fears, new reasons to doubt that love could really conquer the very real obstacles standing between them. Because sometimes, just when you think you found your happy ending, the world reminds you that love, real love, requires more than just feeling it. It requires fighting for it. The next morning arrived with the kind of golden Georgia sunshine that made everything feel possible. Rebecca found herself humming as she prepared breakfast, not because someone had asked her to, but because for the first time in months, her heart felt light enough to carry a tune. She'd arrived early, using the key Mrs. Chun had quietly pressed into her hand the night before with a knowing smile and the words, "Some things are worth fighting for, dear." The kitchen smelled like cinnamon pancakes and fresh coffee, and she'd arranged Oliver's fruit into perfect geometric patterns the way he loved, prepared Ethan's toast cut into musical note shapes, and set Liam's wooden block beside his plate like an honored guest at the breakfast table. "Something smells like heaven." Rebecca turned to find Nathaniel in the doorway, and her breath caught. He wasn't wearing one of his intimidating business suits. Instead, he'd chosen dark jeans and a soft gray sweater that made his eyes look like storm clouds lit by lightning. His hair was still damp from the shower, and he looked approachable, real, like a father instead of a CEO. "You're up early," she said, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened when he smiled. "Couldn't sleep." He moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive but subtle. "Kept thinking about last night." The memory of their almost kiss hung between them like a secret, making the ordinary kitchen feel charged with possibility. "Daddy." Oliver's voice from the doorway broke the spell. He stood there in his Superman pajamas, his dark hair sticking up in impossible directions, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Becca made shapes. Within minutes, all three boys had tumbled into the kitchen like puppies. Their excitement infectious. Ethan immediately began humming his appreciation for the musical toast. Liam carefully picked up his wooden block and offered it to Rebecca, their morning ritual, before settling into his chair with a contentment that made both adults' hearts squeeze. "Daddy, sit," Oliver announced, patting the chair beside him. "Daddy eats shapes too." Rebecca watched as Nathaniel hesitated for just a moment, probably calculating the time he'd lose from his morning routine, before settling into the chair his son had chosen for him. The simple act of joining his children for breakfast instead of grabbing coffee on his way out the door felt revolutionary. "These are beautiful, Rebecca," he said, examining Oliver's geometric fruit arrangement. "How did you know he'd love this?" Oliver's brain sees patterns everywhere, she explained, refilling his coffee cup and trying not to notice how their fingers brushed. "Yesterday I watched him organize his blocks by color, then by size, then by texture. He's not being difficult, he's being brilliant." Oliver beamed at the praise, then carefully picked up a triangle of cantaloupe and offered it to his father. "Share, Daddy." "Good sharing." The moment was so simple, so ordinary, and yet Nathaniel felt tears prick his eyes. When was the last time one of his sons had spontaneously shared something with him? When was the last time breakfast had felt like a family gathering instead of a logistical challenge? "Thank you, buddy," he said, accepting the fruit with the reverence it deserved. "This is the best cantaloupe I've ever tasted." Ethan suddenly stopped mid-bite and looked at Rebecca with those dark, knowing eyes. "Becca stay today?" "I'm staying," she assured him. "All day. We're going to have adventures." "What kind of adventures?" Nathaniel asked, and Rebecca was surprised to hear genuine curiosity in his voice instead of concern about disrupted schedules. "Well," she said conspiratorially, crouching down to the boys' level, "I was thinking we could build a fort in the garden. A really big one, with secret passages and everything." "Fort." Liam spoke up, his first word of the morning, and the excitement in his voice made everyone smile. "And," Rebecca continued, warming to her theme, "maybe we could have a picnic lunch inside the fort. And maybe, just maybe, if someone's daddy doesn't have to work all day, he could join us." Three pairs of dark eyes turned to Nathaniel with such hopeful expectation that refusing would have been like kicking puppies. "You know what?" he said, pulling out his phone and speed-dialing his assistant. "Jennifer? Cancel my meetings today." "Yes, all of them. Something important came up." The cheer that went up from his sons was worth every rescheduled contract point. 2 hours later, Rebecca stood in the garden watching the most successful millionaire in Atlanta crawl around on his hands and knees, helping his boys construct what appeared to be an architectural marvel made entirely of blankets, lawn chairs, and determination. "No, Daddy," Oliver corrected with the patience of a master craftsman. "Triangle goes here. Makes it stronger." "You're absolutely right," Nathaniel said seriously, adjusting the blanket corner exactly as Oliver had directed. I don't know what I was thinking. Ethan was providing the soundtrack to their construction project, humming a tune that somehow perfectly captured the rhythm of their work. And Liam had stationed himself as the official quality inspector, carefully testing each section of their fort with his wooden block to make sure it met his standards. "This is incredible," Rebecca said, settling beside Nathaniel as they watched the boys explore their creation. "They're working together like a real team." "They've never done this before," Nathaniel said quietly. Even with Elena, they usually played separately. Parallel play, the therapists called it. But this is what happens when children feel safe enough to trust, Rebecca finished. When they know the grown-ups aren't going to disappear or get frustrated or give up on them. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their boys, because somehow, without her realizing it, they become their boys, discover the joy of collaboration. "Rebecca," Nathaniel said suddenly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Last night, what we talked about. I meant every word." Her heart did a little skip. "Which part?" "All of it. But especially the part about falling for you." He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gray eyes made her breath catch. "I keep waiting for this to feel wrong or complicated or impossible, but it doesn't. It feels like coming home," she finished, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Exactly like that." The moment stretched between them, full of promise and possibility, until Oliver's voice broke through their reverie. "Becca! Daddy! Come see. Fort is finished." They crawled into the blanket structure, all 5 of them squeezed into the cozy space that smelled like grass and sunshine and childhood magic. The boys had arranged their favorite toys in a circle, creating a kind of shrine to everything they held dear. "This," Ethan announced with unusual eloquence, "is our family fort." Family fort. The words hit both adults like a revelation. "Family," Liam repeated softly, testing out the word like it was something precious he'd found. Rebecca felt tears sting her eyes. "Yes, baby. Family." Nathaniel reached over and took her hand, their fingers interlacing naturally, while 3 little boys chattered about their fort kingdom around them. In the filtered sunlight of their blanket sanctuary, everything felt perfect. Too perfect. "Nathaniel," Rebecca whispered, "what happens when the real world intrudes on this? When people find out about us, about how we feel?" His grip on her hand tightened. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm the help, and you're Nathaniel Blackstone. People are going to have opinions about your grieving process, about appropriate boundaries, about a black woman who dares to love a white millionaire and his children." The harsh reality of their situation settled over them like a cloud passing over the sun. "I don't care what people think," Nathaniel said fiercely, but even as he said it, they both knew it wasn't that simple. "Your business partners will care. Your social circle will care. The boys' therapists and teachers will care." Rebecca's voice grew smaller. "My own community will have things to say about me reaching above my station." "Fort's sad?" Oliver asked suddenly, his intuitive little heart picking up on the shift in emotional energy. "No, baby," Rebecca said quickly, forcing a smile. "Fort is happy. Fort is perfect." But even as she said it, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were living in a beautiful bubble that was destined to burst. That afternoon, while the boys napped in a contented pile in Oliver's room, exhausted from their morning of fort building and adventure, Rebecca and Nathaniel found themselves alone in the kitchen again. "I've been thinking," Nathaniel said, moving closer to her as she cleaned up the remnants of their picnic lunch. "About what you said. About people's opinions. And I think you're right to be concerned. But I also think—" He reached for her hands, pulling her to face him. "I think love this real, this necessary, is worth fighting for. Rebecca's heart hammered against her ribs as he stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, close enough to count his eyelashes. "Rebecca Washington," he said softly, "would you let me take you to dinner? A real dinner, somewhere beautiful, just the two of us." "Nathaniel," she breathed, "are you asking me on a date?" "I'm asking you to let me court you properly. To let me show you that this isn't just about the boys or convenience or gratitude. This is about you and me and the way you make me feel like I'm finally alive again." The space between them disappeared as he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the curve of her cheekbones. "Say yes," he whispered. "Say yes, and let's see what happens when we stop being afraid." Have you ever had to choose between playing it safe and taking a leap of faith for love? We want to hear your story in the comments. Rebecca looked into his eyes, this man who had become so much more than an employer, who had somehow become essential to her happiness, and felt her walls finally, completely crumble. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to dinner, yes to courtship, yes to seeing what happens when we're brave enough to." The kiss that interrupted her was soft and sweet and full of 8 months of loneliness finally finding its end. It tasted like hope and possibility and the promise of a future neither of them had dared to imagine. When they finally broke apart, breathless and glowing, Rebecca felt like she was standing on the edge of forever. "Tomorrow night," Nathaniel said against her forehead. "I'll arrange for Mrs. Chun to stay with the boys. We'll go somewhere no one knows us, somewhere we can just be Nathaniel and Rebecca instead of employer and employee." "Tomorrow night," she agreed, her heart singing with anticipation. But as they stood there in the golden afternoon light, wrapped in each other's arms and drunk on new love, neither of them noticed the black sedan that had been parked across the street for the past hour. Neither of them saw the telephoto lens capturing their intimate moment. Neither of them knew that by tomorrow morning, their perfect bubble would be shattered by forces beyond their control. Because sometimes, just when love feels strong enough to conquer anything, the world reminds you that not everyone wants love to win. Rebecca should have known something was wrong the moment she walked into the mansion the next morning and found Mrs. Chun standing in the foyer with tears streaming down her face. "Rebecca dear," Mrs. Chun said, her voice trembling as she held up her phone. "You need to see this before he does." The headline hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Grieving tech mogul's inappropriate relationship with unqualified nanny raises serious questions about children's welfare. Below it was a photograph that made her stomach plummet, her and Nathaniel in the kitchen yesterday, his hands cupping her face, their lips inches apart, lost in a moment they'd thought was private. The image had been cropped and enhanced to look as intimate and scandalous as possible. How did they? Rebecca's voice came out as a whisper. "Keep reading," Mrs. Chun said gently, though her expression suggested she wished she didn't have to. Rebecca's hand shook as she scrolled through the article, each word feeling like a knife twist. Sources close to the Blackstone family express concern about the highly inappropriate relationship developing between recently widowed tech executive Nathaniel Blackstone and Rebecca Washington, an unqualified caregiver with no formal training in autism spectrum disorders. She has no credentials, no background in special needs care, and now she's clearly overstepped every professional boundary, says Dr. Margaret Wellington Smith, one of 19 previous nannies dismissed from the position. Those poor children need proper care, not someone who's obviously seduced their vulnerable father for financial gain. Washington, a single mother from a low-income neighborhood, was reportedly hired out of desperation after the family's inability to retain qualified staff. Child welfare advocates are calling for an investigation into the living situation, questioning whether the children are receiving appropriate care or if they're being used as pawns in an opportunistic relationship. The words blurred as tears filled Rebecca's eyes. Seduced for financial gain. Opportunistic. Unqualified. Every fear she'd ever had about not being good enough, about not belonging in Nathaniel's world, was printed in black and white for the entire city to see. "Where is he?" she managed to ask. Home office. He's been in there since 5 a.m. taking calls from his lawyers, his publicist, his board of directors. Mrs. Chen's voice broke. Rebecca, they're saying terrible things. About you, about the boys, about what kind of father he is. His own mother called and the sound of a door slamming echoed through the mansion, followed by Nathaniel's voice raised in anger, a sound that made both women flinch. I don't care what the board thinks. These are my children, my life, my choices. Rebecca moved toward the office, her heart breaking with each step. Through the partially open door, she could see Nathaniel pacing like a caged animal, his phone pressed to his ear, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. No, Jennifer, absolutely not. I will not be making a statement distancing myself from Rebecca. I will not be characterizing this as a temporary lapse in judgment. And I sure as hell won't be issuing an apology for. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Rebecca in the doorway, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. The phone slipped from his hand. You saw it, he said quietly. All of it. Her voice was barely audible. Nathaniel, they're calling for a child welfare investigation. They're saying that I'm using the boys to get to you. That's garbage, and everyone with half a brain knows it. But even as he said it, she could see the strain in his eyes, the weight of pressure from every direction. Do they? Rebecca stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like they have a point. I am unqualified. I don't have the right degrees or credentials. I am from a different world than you. Rebecca don't, and maybe they're right about the rest too. The words felt like glass in her throat. Maybe I did get too attached, too involved. Maybe I did cross lines I had no business crossing. Nathaniel moved toward her, but she held up a hand to stop him. My phone's been ringing all morning, she continued, her voice getting stronger even as her heart shattered. Reporters wanting quotes, neighbors asking if it's true that I'm sleeping with my employer, Maya's school calling because someone told them her mother is a gold digger who abandoned her daughter to chase a rich man. Maya. Nathaniel's voice sharpened with concern. Is she okay? The fact that his first instinct was to worry about her daughter made this so much harder. She's scared. Confused. She doesn't understand why people are saying mean things about her mama. Rebecca wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold together pieces that felt like they were falling apart. She asked me if I loved those boys more than I love her. The silence that followed was devastating. What did you tell her? Nathaniel asked quietly. I told her that love isn't a competition. But you know what I realized, standing in my daughter's bedroom this morning, trying to explain why her whole world is being turned upside down. Rebecca's voice cracked. I realized that loving your boys, loving you, might be the most selfish thing I've ever done. That's not true, isn't it? She turned to face him fully, and the pain in her eyes made him step back. I took this job because I needed money. I stayed because I fell in love, with Oliver's brilliant mind, with Ethan's beautiful music, with Liam's gentle heart. With you. But in the process, I've put my own daughter at risk, opened your family up to scrutiny, and given your enemies ammunition to question your fitness as a father. From somewhere in the house came the sound of children's voices, Oliver calling for Rebecca, Ethan humming his morning song, Liam asking where Becca was. The sounds that usually filled her heart with joy now felt like daggers. You're not responsible for what those vultures wrote, Nathaniel said fiercely. I am. I should have protected you, should have seen this coming, should have what? Hidden me away like a dirty secret? Pretended what we feel isn't real. Rebecca shook her head. This isn't about protection, Nathaniel. This is about reality. And the reality is that some loves cost too much. The door burst open suddenly, and Oliver ran in, still in his pajamas, his face bright with excitement. "Becca, come see. I made a tower that reaches the ceiling and—" He stopped, his intuitive little heart immediately picking up on the tension in the room. "Why sad?" Rebecca knelt down to his level, her heart breaking all over again as she looked into those dark eyes that trusted her completely. "Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices, baby," she said, softly. "What kind of choices?" Rebecca glanced up at Nathaniel, seeing her own agony reflected in his face. "Sometimes we have to choose between what we want and what's best for the people we love." Ethan and Liam appeared in the doorway, drawn by their brother's distress. All three boys sensed the shift in the emotional landscape, their small faces growing worried. "Becca leaving?" Liam asked, his grip tightening on his wooden block. The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Rebecca started, then stopped. "How do you explain to 3-year-olds that sometimes love isn't enough? That sometimes the world decides your love is wrong, inappropriate, dangerous?" Her phone buzzed with yet another call from an unknown number. Another reporter, probably. Another person wanting to dissect her life, her choices, her worthiness to love and be loved. "I have to go," she said suddenly, standing up so fast it made the boys step back. "I have to. I need to think. I need to figure out how to protect Maya from this, how to—" "Rebecca, please." Nathaniel's voice was raw with desperation. "Don't let them win. Don't let fear make this choice for us." She looked at him, this man who had become her everything in the space of a few days, and felt her heart shatter completely. "I'm not letting fear make the choice," she said quietly. "I'm letting love make it. Because sometimes, when you really love someone, you walk away before you destroy them." Have you ever had to choose between your own happiness and protecting someone you love? Share your story in the comments. "Boys," she said, turning back to the three little faces that had become the center of her world, "I need you to remember something very important. You are brilliant and beautiful and perfect exactly as you are. Never let anyone tell you different, okay?" "Becca come back?" Ethan asked, his voice small and scared. Rebecca felt tears she'd been holding back finally spill over. "I don't know, baby. I just don't know." She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, each step feeling like she was tearing away pieces of her own heart. Behind her, she could hear Oliver starting to cry, Ethan's confused questions, Liam's silence that was somehow worse than screaming. "Rebecca." Nathaniel called after her. "Don't do this. We can fight this together." But she was already gone, leaving behind the life she'd never dared to hope for and the love that had felt like coming home. As her car pulled away from the estate, Rebecca caught a glimpse in her rearview mirror of Nathaniel standing in the doorway, his sons clustered around him, all of them watching her disappear. And for the first time since this nightmare began, she wondered if maybe the reporters were right about one thing. Maybe she really was the wrong person for this family. Maybe love wasn't always enough to bridge the gap between two different worlds. Maybe some fairy tales were never meant to have happy endings. 3 days of silence that felt like a lifetime. Rebecca sat on the edge of her narrow bed in the cramped apartment that suddenly felt more like a prison than a home, staring at the stack of bills that had somehow multiplied while her world was falling apart. The electricity company wanted $247. The landlord wanted 2 months' rent. Maya's school needed money for the field trip that Rebecca couldn't afford but couldn't bear to deny her daughter. Her phone lay silent on the nightstand. No calls from the Blackstone house. No texts asking when she was coming back. Nothing. "Because you told them not to contact you," a voice in her head reminded her. "Because you walked away." Maya appeared in the doorway, still in her school uniform, her backpack dragging behind her like it weighed 100 pounds. At 7 years old, she developed that careful way of watching her mother that children learn when their world becomes unpredictable. Mama. Maya's voice was soft, uncertain. Mrs. Rodriguez from downstairs says there are still reporters outside asking about you. Rebecca's chest tightened. Even here, in their tiny sanctuary, the world's judgment followed them. Don't worry about them, baby girl. They'll get bored and find someone else to bother. Maya climbed onto the bed beside her mother, her small hand finding Rebecca's with a kind of intuitive comfort that made Rebecca's heart ache. Are you gonna go back to work with the little boys? The question Rebecca had been dreading. The one she'd been asking herself every hour of every day since she'd walked out of that mansion. I don't know, Maya. It's complicated. Because of the mean things people are saying. Partly. Maya was quiet for a long moment, her 7-year-old brain working through complexities that no child should have to navigate. Mama, do you love those little boys? Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. Yes, baby. I love them very much. And they love you. I think so. Then why can't you just love each other? Why do the grown-ups have to make it so hard? The simple wisdom of a child. Why did the grown-ups have to make it so hard? Rebecca's phone buzzed suddenly, not with a call, but with a text from Mrs. Chun. The boys haven't eaten properly in 3 days. Oliver stopped building his patterns. Ethan won't hum. Liam has regressed to hiding in closets. Mr. Blackstone. I'm worried about him too. Another text followed immediately. I know you think you're protecting them by staying away. But sometimes protection looks like fighting for the people you love, not abandoning them. Rebecca stared at the messages until the words blurred. Mrs. Chun was right, wasn't she? When had protection become abandonment? When had love become running away? Meanwhile, across town in his home office, Nathaniel sat surrounded by the debris of his collapsing world. Legal documents covered his desk, custody evaluations, media response strategies, crisis management plans. His laptop screen showed his company's stock price, which had dropped 12% since the story broke. His phone displayed 17 missed calls from his mother, each voicemail more hysterical than the last. But none of that mattered as much as the sound of silence where his children's laughter used to be. Oliver hadn't built a single structure in 3 days. His breakfast Cheerios lay scattered and abandoned each morning, their perfect patterns forgotten. Ethan's songs had died in his throat, replaced by a hollow quiet that was worse than any tantrum. And Liam. Liam had stopped speaking entirely, retreating into corners and closets like he was trying to make himself invisible. Sir. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway with another untouched lunch tray. The boys are asking for her again. Nathaniel looked up from the legal documents that were supposed to solve everything and felt the weight of his own failures crushing his chest. What did you tell them? The same thing you told me to tell them. That Rebecca is taking some time away. And what did they say? Mrs. Chen's expression softened with sympathy. Liam asked if time away means the same thing as when their mama went to heaven. The words hit Nathaniel like a physical blow. His sons thought Rebecca was dead. They thought she'd abandoned them the same way death had stolen their mother. Jesus, he whispered, running his hands through hair that hadn't seen a proper styling in days. I've made a mess of everything, haven't I? Have you? Mrs. Chun asked gently. Or have you just forgotten what's actually important? Before Nathaniel could answer, his office door burst open and his mother swept in like a well-dressed hurricane. Margaret Blackstone was 62 years old, perfectly coiffed, and possessed of the kind of social authority that came from old money and older prejudices. Nathaniel, this has gone quite far enough, she announced, settling into the chair across from his desk without invitation. I've spoken with the board, with your legal team, with Dr. Martinez. Everyone agrees the solution is simple. Which is: issue a statement. Distance yourself from this woman. Emphasize that it was a temporary lapse in judgment brought on by grief. Assure everyone that you're seeking proper qualified care for the children. Nathaniel looked at his mother, this woman who had raised him with love but also with very clear ideas about social boundaries and appropriate relationships, and felt something harden in his chest. No. I beg your pardon. I said no. He stood up, his full height making him tower over her seated form. I will not distance myself from Rebecca. I will not characterize loving her as a lapse in judgment. And I sure as hell won't pretend that what she's given my children, what she's given me, is anything less than miraculous. His mother's perfectly manicured hand fluttered to her chest. Nathaniel, be reasonable. Think about your reputation, the company, the children's future. I am thinking about the children's future, he said firmly. For the first time in 8 months, I'm thinking clearly about what they actually need instead of what everyone else thinks they should need. And what exactly do you think they need? Nathaniel moved to the window that overlooked the garden where Rebecca had built that magnificent fort with his sons, where they'd all laughed together like a real family for the first time since Elena died. They need love, Mother. Not the conditional, socially appropriate kind that comes with disclaimers and conditions. They need the fierce, protective, unconditional love that Rebecca gives them. The kind that sees their autism as a different way of being brilliant, not a problem to be fixed. That woman has no credentials. That woman has something more valuable than credentials, Nathaniel interrupted. She has a heart that understands theirs. She speaks their language. She makes them feel safe and loved and valued exactly as they are. He turned back to face his mother, and she was startled by the determination in his eyes. And more than that, she makes me remember who I used to be before grief turned me into someone who was afraid to love my own children properly. Nathaniel, please. Think about what you're saying. The social implications, the professional consequences. You want to know what I'm thinking about. His voice grew stronger with each word. I'm thinking about Oliver asking me this morning if he did something wrong to make Rebecca go away. I'm thinking about Ethan crying himself to sleep because he thinks his songs weren't good enough. I'm thinking about Liam hiding in closets because he's convinced that everyone he loves disappears. The silence that followed was deafening. I'm thinking, Nathaniel continued, his voice rough with emotion, about the fact that I found real love twice in my lifetime, and I was stupid enough to let fear drive it away both times. Elena would be ashamed of me for letting other people's opinions matter more than our children's happiness. His mother's expression softened slightly. Nathaniel, I know you loved Elena. I did love Elena. I loved her desperately, completely, the way you love someone who becomes part of your soul. But she's gone, Mother. And I have to choose whether to honor her memory by living in the past or by building a future that would make her proud. He moved to his desk and began gathering the legal documents, the crisis management plans, all the paperwork designed to make this problem disappear. And Elena would want me to fight for Rebecca. She would want our boys to know that love, real transformative love, is worth fighting for, no matter what anyone else thinks. One by one, he fed the documents into his paper shredder. What are you doing? His mother asked, alarmed. I'm making a choice, he said simply. The choice I should have made 3 days ago. He reached for his phone and scrolled to Rebecca's number, the number he'd been staring at for 72 hours without the courage to call. Nathaniel, think about this. I have thought about it. For 3 days, I've thought about nothing else. And you know what I realized. He looked at his mother with eyes that held no doubt, no fear, only determination. I realize that some things are more important than reputation or social approval or what people think is appropriate. His finger hovered over Rebecca's name. I realized that my sons need their father to be brave enough to fight for the people who love them. And I need to be brave enough to fight for the woman who brought our family back to life. Have you ever had to choose between what society expected and what your heart knew was right? Tell us about that moment in the comments. He pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Please, he whispered to whatever force in the universe controlled second chances. Please let her answer. Please let it not be too late. On the 4th ring, her voice came through the speaker, tentative and guarded. Nathaniel. Rebecca. Her name came out like a prayer. We need to talk. Rebecca. Her name came out like a prayer. We need to talk. The silence on the other end lasted so long that Nathaniel thought she might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Nathaniel, we can't keep doing this. It's too hard on everyone, especially the boys. You're right, he said, and he could hear her sharp intake of breath at the unexpected agreement. It is too hard. Which is why I'm not asking you to come back as their nanny. Another silence. Then, what are you asking? Nathaniel looked out at the garden where his sons should have been playing but instead sat listlessly on the back steps, 3 little figures who had lost their spark when Rebecca walked away. I'm asking you to come back as the woman I love. As the person who makes my children laugh again. As the missing piece of our family that we can't live without. Nathaniel, Rebecca, please. Just hear me out. I know the last 3 days have been hell. I know the reporters and the judgment, and all of it has been awful. But do you know what's been worse? He could hear Maya's voice in the background, asking if that was the man with the little boys. Rebecca's gentle response that yes, it was. What's been worse is watching Oliver forget how to build things because the person who understood his brilliant mind isn't here to see them. What's been worse is listening to the silence where Ethan's music used to be. What's been worse is finding Liam in closets because he thinks everyone he loves disappears. A soft sob came through the phone. Don't do this to me. Don't make me hope when we both know. When we both know what? That some people will disapprove? That some reporters will write ugly stories? That my mother thinks I'm making a mistake? His voice grew stronger. Rebecca, I've spent 3 days listening to everyone tell me what I should do, what's appropriate, what makes sense. And you know what? None of them love my boys the way you do. None of them make me feel alive again the way you do. In her cramped apartment, Rebecca sank onto her bed, Maya climbing into her lap with the intuitive understanding that her mama needed comfort. But the investigation, the questions about your fitness as a father, let them investigate, Nathaniel said firmly. Let them see how my children thrived in your care. Let them see the progress reports from the 3 days you were here versus the complete regression since you left. Let them try to argue that love is harmful. Maya tugged on Rebecca's shirt. Mama, are you crying happy tears or sad tears? I don't know yet, baby girl, Rebecca whispered. Through the phone, Nathaniel heard the exchange and felt his heart squeeze. Is that Maya? Can I talk to her for a second? Rebecca hesitated, then put the phone on speaker. Maya, someone wants to say hello. Hi, Maya. Nathaniel's voice was gentle, warm. I'm Nathaniel. I have 3 little boys who miss your mama very much. Maya studied the phone with 7-year-old seriousness. Are you the one who made my mama sad? Yes, Nathaniel said honestly. I made some mistakes because I was scared. But I want to fix them if your mama will let me. Do your little boys really miss her? They do. They haven't smiled since she left. And neither have I. Maya looked at her mother with those wise eyes that saw too much. Mama, Remember when you told me that love means fighting for people, not giving up on them? Rebecca's breath caught. Her own words, spoken months ago when Maya had been afraid that her best friend didn't like her anymore. You said that when something is worth having, it's worth fighting for, Maya continued. Are they worth fighting for, Mama? Before Rebecca could answer, Nathaniel's voice came through the phone again, but this time it was different, raw, vulnerable, stripped of all pretense. Rebecca, I know I'm asking a lot. I know loving us means dealing with scrutiny and judgment, and people who think they know what's best for everyone. But I also know that my sons haven't eaten a proper meal since you left. I know that Oliver built something yesterday, the first thing in 3 days, and when Mrs. Chen asked what it was, he said it was a bridge to bring Becca home. Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face. He said that. He said that. And Ethan. Ethan started humming again today, but only one song. The one you taught him that first afternoon. And Liam. Rebecca, Liam hasn't spoken a word in 3 days, but this morning he handed me his wooden block and pointed to the door. The image of Liam, sweet, sensitive Liam, trying to send his most precious possession to bring her home broke something open in Rebecca's chest. They need you, Nathaniel continued. I need you. Not as an employee, not as a convenient solution to our problems, but as the woman who taught us how to be a family again. Maya was watching her mother's face with the intensity of someone who understood that big decisions were being made. Mama, Maya said softly, when you talk about them you smile. Like, really smile. Like when you used to talk about Grandma. Rebecca looked at her daughter, this wise, beautiful girl who had been her whole world for 7 years, and saw not jealousy or fear, but understanding. You think I should go back? Rebecca asked. I think you should be happy, Maya said simply. And I think maybe I could meet them? The little boys who need my mama. Through the phone, Nathaniel's voice was thick with emotion. Maya, if your mama says yes, if she comes back to us, you would be so welcome here. The boys would love to meet the girl who taught their Becca how to be so amazing. Rebecca closed her eyes, and for the first time in 3 days, she could see a path forward. Not an easy path. There would still be challenges, still be people who disapproved, still be obstacles to overcome. But a path where love won. Where family meant chosen as much as blood. Where 3 broken boys and their grieving father could heal alongside a single mother and her wise daughter. Nathaniel, she said finally, if I come back, when I come back, things have to be different. Different how? No more hiding. No more pretending this is just about the boys. If we're going to do this, we do it honestly. As a family. All of us. Yes, he said immediately. God, yes. Rebecca, are you saying, I'm saying I love you. I love your boys. I love the way you all make me feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. She looked at Maya, who was grinning now. I'm saying that some things are worth fighting for. Come home, Nathaniel said simply. Please. Come home. 20 minutes later, Rebecca's beat-up Honda pulled through the gates of the Blackstone estate, Maya wide-eyed in the passenger seat as she took in the mansion that looked like something from a fairy tale. Mama, it's huge, Maya breathed. It is, Rebecca agreed. But you know what makes it special? The people inside. They'd barely gotten out of the car when the front door flew open and 3 small tornadoes in human form came running down the circular driveway. Becca. Oliver's voice cracked with joy as he launched himself into her arms. You came back. You came back. Ethan was right behind him, wrapping himself around her legs and humming, actually humming, the song she'd taught him that first magical day. And Liam, precious Liam walked up slowly, held out his wooden block with trembling hands and whispered, Stay. "I'm staying, baby boy," Rebecca said, kneeling to gather all 3 boys in her arms. "I'm staying forever." Maya hung back slightly, overwhelmed by the intensity of emotion, until Oliver noticed her and tilted his head in that calculating way. "Who's that?" he asked. "This is Maya," Rebecca said, standing and putting her arm around her daughter. "She's my little girl, and she's been very excited to meet you." Ethan stepped forward with the kind of courage that only children possess. "Hi, Maya. I'm Ethan. I like your braids." "Thank you," Maya said shyly. "I like your humming." And just like that, the barriers dissolved. Within minutes, Oliver was showing Maya his favorite building blocks, Ethan was teaching her his songs, and Liam had offered her his wooden block, the highest honor he could bestow. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway, still wearing yesterday's clothes, his hair disheveled, his eyes red with exhaustion and relief. When he saw Rebecca surrounded by all 4 children, his 3 and her 1, already blending like they'd been family forever, his face broke into the first real smile he'd worn in 3 days. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi," she said back. The space between them disappeared as he crossed the driveway and pulled her into his arms, holding her like he was afraid she might vanish again. "I'm sorry," he whispered against her hair. "I'm sorry I let them make me afraid. I'm sorry I let you walk away." "I'm sorry I walked away," she whispered back. "I should have stayed and fought." "We're fighting now," he said, pulling back to look at her face. "Together." That evening, after Maya had been given the grand tour and pronounced the mansion the coolest house ever, after the boys had shown her their fort in the garden, and she'd helped them rebuild it even bigger and better, after dinner had been eaten and baths had been taken and stories had been read, Rebecca found herself tucked into the living room where it all began. All 5 of them, 4 children and 1 grown man, were piled on the floor in a tangle of blankets and pillows and contentment. Oliver had built a complex structure out of blocks that somehow incorporated Maya's hair ties. Ethan was humming a lullaby that blended his melody with one Maya had taught him. Liam was fast asleep against Rebecca's shoulder, his wooden block clutched in one hand and Maya's fingers in the other. "This is what family looks like," Nathaniel said softly, his arm around Rebecca's waist as they watched their children create their own magic. "This is what love looks like," Rebecca corrected. "Messy and complicated and absolutely perfect." 6 months later, the same living room would host a very different kind of gathering. A small, intimate wedding where 3 little boys served as ring bearers and a 7-year-old girl served as maid of honor. Where Mrs. Chun cried happy tears and even Nathaniel's mother admitted that maybe sometimes, love really did know best. But tonight, in the quiet glow of contentment, they were already family. Already home. Already proof that the most unthinkable thing you can do is sometimes exactly the thing that saves everyone. What's the most unthinkable thing love has ever asked you to do? Share your story with us, because sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that choose each other against all odds. Rebecca watched Oliver teach Maya the art of perfect patterns, as she listened to Ethan's lullabies blend with Maya's giggles, as she felt Liam's peaceful breathing against her shoulder and Nathaniel's steady heartbeat beside her. She understood something profound. Love wasn't about being qualified or appropriate or meeting other people's expectations. Love was about showing up every day with your whole heart, ready to fight for the people who needed you most. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, they fought back. Sometimes the most unthinkable thing turned out to be the most natural thing in the world. Sometimes broken pieces fit together better than they ever had when they were whole. And sometimes, just sometimes, love really was enough to conquer everything. If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button, because every family deserves a love story this beautiful.